Our third poem for these 3 hours on Good Friday is the fourth stanza of East Coker, the second poem in the four quartets by T.S. Eliot. In this stanza in East Coker, Eliot responds to that very pertinent question: why do we call this day of all days, this Friday of all Fridays, Good Friday? Eliot's ashes are buried in the church in East Coker in Somerset. His Eliot Puritan ancestors left there for New England in the 1660s. The family became Unitarians and migrated to Missouri, where T.S. Eliot was born in St. Louis. His own life story is a pilgrimage from that Puritan Unitarian background of his birth to embracing Christian faith in its Anglo-Catholic expression in 1927. His spiritual yearning found expression in his first great poetic work, The Wasteland, with its oft-quoted opening words, "April is the cruelest month." Four Quartets is his last great poetic work, his religious refraction of the wasteland. This is one of the most profound Christian works of poetry of the 20th century and the literary canon. In four long poems, each with 5 sections, he explores the relation of time and redemption, the self and history, the soul and the Saviour. In the third stanza of East Coker, he recalls, "I said to my soul, be still and wait without hope, for hope would be hope for the wrong thing. Wait without love, for love would be love of the wrong thing. Now there is yet faith, but the faith and the love and the hope are all in the waiting. Wait without thought, for you are not ready for thought. The wild thyme unseen and the wild strawberry, the laughter in the garden, echoed ecstasy not lost, but requiring, pointing to the agony of death and birth." In the late 1930s, Eliot cycled over to East Coker while he was staying with friends nearby, but this was not so much an ancestral village for Eliot as an idea, a poetic metaphor, an idyll of England at the start of the Second World War. It was, metaphorically, his beginning and his end. In a poetic paradox, this poem begins, "In my beginning is my end." And at the end of the poem, he says, "In my end is my beginning." Eliot's Good Friday in East Coker is a place of wounded surgeons, dying nurses, and the whole earth is our hospital endowed by the ruined millionaire. Even if we recover, we shall still die of the absolute paternal care that will not leave us. Good Friday, the darkest day in the church calendar, is fraught with harsh paradoxes. The crowds that hailed Christ as King on Palm Sunday now cry for his crucifixion. The only perfect man is condemned as a criminal. The sins of all in time and space come together and are put to death on the cross. The eternal God perishes, and yet on this Friday of deepest tragedy, in spite of that, we call this Friday good. T.S. Eliot contemplates another paradox in this poem, the mystery of our healing at the hands of a wounded Saviour. East Coker is the second poem in the four quartets. The fourth section presents a picture of Christ, who is at the centre of all. In other parts of the work, Christ is pictured more abstractly and symbolically as the still point of the turning world. But here, in a heartrending way, he is human. Drawing on medieval and biblical imagery of Christ as both the great physician and the suffering Saviour, Eliot portrays the Christ of Good Friday as the wounded surgeon. In throbbing rhythm and sharp rhyme, the 5 stanzas of East Coker cloak Good Friday's paradoxical revelations of the nature of salvation, sanctification, and sacrament in the garb of the hospital. Christ is the wounded surgeon with the bleeding hands, healing us who are sick in the knowing and mercy bought of his own death. The German word Seelsorger, a carer of the souls, is also a German word for priest. Among the patristic writers, St. John Chrysostom says that every priest is, as it were, the father of the whole world, and therefore should have care of all the souls to whose salvation he can cooperate by his labors. Besides, priests are appointed by God as physicians to cure every soul that is infirm. Origen calls priests physicians of souls, while St. Jerome calls us spiritual physicians. Later, St. Bonaventure asks, if the physician flees from the sick, who will cure them? The Fourth Lateran Council in 1215 drew an analogy between the physicians of the body and the physicians of the soul. The English word curate refers to a person who is charged with the care or cure of souls in a parish. In Eliot's East Coker, the church that ministers his salvation is staffed by dying nurses, attending the suffering because they share their condition. The whole earth is our hospital, a place in which all instruments and activity are intended to work for our healing. And yet, that healing comes through worsening sickness, unpleasing care, eventual death, and the nourishment of the dripping blood and bloody flesh that alone can sustain our bodies and spirits alike. This, too, is a description of Eliot's sacramental faith and piety as an Anglican, as an Anglo-Catholic. Yet he merely hints at the full final meaning. A joy beyond death is not proclaimed, for this poem single-mindedly honours the sharp compassion by which we call this Friday good.
East Coker, Stanza 4 by T.S. Eliot. The wounded surgeon plies the steel that questions the distempered part. Beneath the bleeding hands we feel the sharp compassion of the healer's art, resolving the enigma of the fever chart. Our only health is the disease if we obey the dying nurse, whose constant care is not to please, but to remind of our and Adam's curse, and that, to be restored, our sickness must grow worse. The whole earth is our hospital, endowed by ruined millionaire, wherein, if we do well, we shall die of absolute paternal care that will not leave us, but prevents us everywhere. The chill ascends from feet to knees, the fever sings in mental wires. If to be warmed, then I must freeze and quake in frigid purgatorial fires, of which the flame is rose and the smoke is briars. The dripping blood our only drink, the bloody flesh our only food, in spite of which we like to think that we are sound, substantial flesh and blood. Again, in spite of that, we call this Friday good.